For decades, there has been one major problem that has faced Wizards of the Coast and the D&D team. While the game is approaching its 50th birthday, it's no secret that it has had by far its most success since 2014 with the printing of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. It was a coalescing of timing and good fortune, to be sure, with the advent of live streaming and a few nerdy-ass voice actors that were instrumental in bringing D&D to the mainstream. But the question still lingers. How can Dungeons & Dragons ensure its continued growth and success for decades more to come? The tabletop role-playing game market is very competitive right now, with games like Pathfinder, Starfinder, Call of Cthulhu, and so many others picking up steam. The team behind D&D, which has been considered by many to be resting on its laurels for the better part of a decade or even longer, needs to do something to reinvigorate its player base and capture the time of more and more people. Enter One D&D. The prevailing strategy right now at Wizards of the Coast seems to be complete control and sheer dominance. From already having the most popular TTRPG, to acquiring D&D Beyond, the most popular digital repository for the game, and now creating their own virtual tabletop to snuff out the likes of Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds, the Dungeons & Dragons team is pretty clearly on a warpath. I won't go into the detail of the implications of these moves here. Cody from Taking 20 has a phenomenal video about the topic, so if you've happened to miss that, I will link it in the description below. But in any case, this video is not about that. This video is intended to be a little bit more positive in nature. Most people watching this will have at some point brought in a friend to the game and had to explain it to them, or they were the ones that were brought into the game and had mountains of rules dumped on you, and therein lies the discussion for this video. The new player experience. One D&D brings with it a wonderful opportunity to reinvent many aspects of the game, but it certainly is a tricky balance. As they have stated that it is a goal of the revamp to maintain backwards compatibility with 5th edition, if that is indeed true, they have certainly painted themselves into a little bit of a corner in terms of what can actually be changed. As an aside, when they refer to backwards compatibility, I have to assume that they are simply referring to previously printed adventures and campaign settings and, to a lesser extent, rule supplements. In preparation for this video, I spent a lot of time thinking about things that might be complicated or confusing to new players, speaking with others, and reflecting back on my own experiences. I kept focusing on these really specific mechanics that are weird, like jumping and alternate skill checks, but those really aren't the problems that are facing new players. The problem, to me at least, is just how daunting it all seems. There's two main ways that I think Wizards of the Coast can improve the new player experience moving forward, and that is by simplifying both the rules and character creation. To clarify, when I say simplify the rules, I do not mean that a secondary set of rules should be created like the basic and advanced D&D split of the 70s and beyond. Instead, what I mean is that a true basic and streamlined version of the current basic rules should be created. As it stands right now, the basic rules are really just a trimmed down version of and excerpts from the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. Nothing about it is basic, it's just shorter. And not to say that it's even short, it's still 180 pages. Nothing like sitting down with someone to introduce them to the game and offering them a novel to get started. And yes, I know that you do not need to read the entirety of the document to play the game, but that is exactly my point. The current basic rules, while potentially very helpful, particularly to a new dungeon master, do little to assist a new player. Sure, they walk you through the step-by-step process of creating a character, using ability scores, how adventuring, combat, and spellcasting all works, but that is still going to be extremely overwhelming to a new player, as it's still dozens and dozens of pages. If you're enjoying this video, let me know in the comments below what rule you found the most confusing or complicated as a new player or DM, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my One D&D content. Truthfully, to actually play Dungeons & Dragons for the first time, a player does not actually need to know all that much. The game essentially boils down to, you can do, or at least try to do, anything that you want. The numbers and scores on the sheet in front of you show how good or bad you are at a particular task. The dice indicated next to each attack or spell indicates the size of dice needed for using those things. The Dungeon Master will then guide you along for the rest. And honestly, that's kind of it. It would not be terribly difficult to drop a single page document outlining the absolute basics a player needs to know to play the game. In fact, they already have. You just have to dig around for it on their website a little bit. These documents, right here, these are what the basic rules should be. Everything else that a player needs to know during the game can be learned and explored organically without any need to front load the information and drown a player in reference material. The group is sneaking up on some goblins? Now is a great time to introduce advantage and disadvantage, or the surprise mechanic. The wizard is running out of spells and expresses concern? Now is a good time to discuss rituals. A player moves away from an enemy during combat? Is a great time to learn about opportunity attacks. The crux is that the learning experience for the game can and should be both organic and dynamic. Bombarding a player with rules and exceptions and timings and spells and rests and races and combat and exploration and items and attunement and classes and overland travel before you've even started is a really hard sell. The future I envision for Dungeons & Dragons is one where a group of people that have never played the game before can get together and be up and running within 20 minutes. A tall order? Absolutely. But I think it's very possible. Of course, having at least one experienced player or dungeon master among the group can certainly help things along, but that's true of any game. The difference here is that with D&D, it almost feels like a requirement to have at least one experienced player at the table. Though admittedly, this is not universally true. Even for myself, when my group and I began playing, none of us, including me, had ever played the game before. With each starter set adventure, Wizards of the Coast has included a few pre-generated characters to help new players get up and running without needing to do the work of creating a character sheet from scratch. I think this has definitely been an excellent step to improve the new player experience, but I can't help but feel like the way it's done still feels a bit much. Despite the fact that they have managed to condense so much material down to just 2 pages, the biggest problem is that they have condensed so much material down to just 2 pages. I'm not really sure that there's a clear and elegant way to display so much information in a way that feels inviting or still welcoming. I can't help but feel like so much of it should simply be omitted entirely or simply left to the reference documents that they already make. Everything about personality traits, goals, bonds, flaws should just be removed from these sheets. Additionally, a lot of the wordy descriptions of various abilities like spellcasting and dark vision should go as well, as those are also included on the reference sheets. Finally, remove the race and background blurbs, and the sheet just becomes so much easier to read and is far less overwhelming. Furthermore, I really believe that starter adventures should essentially be one-shots designed for first-level characters, maybe into second level, so players can feel what that improvement is like. And while yes, I am aware of the plethora of third-party and homebrew content available for the game, that simply isn't the point. I suspect that the majority of new players want an official experience before they venture off into homebrew territory. When designing pre-generated spellcasters, the sheet should already be pre-populated with the spells already chosen, and their descriptions should be provided at the end of the sheet. Seeing as we would only be including first or second level characters anyway, this should not take up all that much space, feel way less overwhelming, and would make the startup process that much simpler. If Wizards of the Coast wants to make One D&D the perpetual and forever version of the game, which I do believe is possible, I firmly think that they need to take a look at the new player experience. I know that 5e and One D&D has taken a lot of flack for being too simple or focused on new players already, but I just think that the efforts are being placed in a lot of the wrong places. Including spell and skill suggestions in the text as they are doing now is an amazing idea. It will genuinely help players transition from playing a character for a few hours on one night to wanting to make something that feels all their own. But before we can even get there, we should enable players to simply be able to jump into the game as they would any other board game. So what do you think about the new player experience? What would you do to encourage or to make One D&D easier to get into? If you like this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. You might also like some of my other videos about the history of D&D and what I think makes for a good campaign, or some of my other One D&D content. Take care.